Every day, something dramatic happens in the Caribbean that affects our lives. We'll give you the details. We'll give you the facts on Caribbean Perspective with Eddie Frederick. Here's Eddie Frederick.
So glad you can join us. UWI defends its position to take the state of Trinidad and Tobago to court. This story takes the lead in our 1000th edition of Caribbean Perspective for Friday, 4th December 2020. Details when we return. Welcome back. The law faculty of the University of the West Indies St. Augustine campus in Trinidad and Tobago is defending its legal proceedings against the state concerning inhumane treatment of prisoners on remand. Since the motion was filed on November 20th this year, it has raised eyebrows in certain quarters. However, the head of the faculty says if its legal challenge is successful, every citizen will benefit. TV6's Marlon Hopkinson has that story.
According to Professor Rosemary Bell Antoine, her faculty's role is to protect people's constitutional rights, freedoms, and liberties. Speaking on the morning edition, she said the matter is a human rights one, as too many persons on remand are being subjected to inhumane treatment at the nation's prisons. She said the entire system needs to change, and added that trials must be expedited and no one must be deprived of their freedoms and liberties.
Any day you or I could be charged. It doesn't take much to be charged. It doesn't take much to be charged. We could be put in jail. Either we cannot pay the bail because we are too poor, or it can be that there is no bail. There's no bail at all offered, as in murder cases. In our system, which is not the case all over the world, if you are charged with murder, for instance, there's no opportunity for bail. So all this notion of presumption of innocence and so on, that goes to the window.
Professor Bell Antoine said the problem is most acute here when compared to other Caribbean countries.
We are the worst in the entire Caribbean. We are the top, almost 60%. We got a statistic from the prison itself, by the way. The highest number of remandees, almost 60%, and also the highest numbers of persons for long periods. So almost 35% of persons in the prison on remand are there for 5 years or more, and 12.5%, this was last year, for 10 years or more. So we're talking about a lot of people.
The university professor said the existing system is not a just one.
Sometimes the state needs a push. So it is only if there's a ruling that this is unconstitutional, and this is what we are arguing, it is unconstitutional, several grounds, due process, the right to trial within a reasonable time, 10 years, 18 years. One of our persons has been on remand for 18 years. There's someone I met in there when I took my student to the prison last year who said he was there for 21 years. I'm still trying to verify. It just seems so horrific to me.
The European Union is the donor of the project, which is being assisted by human rights lawyer Gregory Dalzin and the Cropper Foundation. Marlon Hopkinson, TV6 News.
Meantime, Trinidad and Tobago could get around 3 different COVID-19 vaccines in the not-too-distant future. Pfizer may be one of the choices by the Ministry of Health, but the Ministry of Health states that several crucial factors are at play, including cost of storage facilities. However, the United Kingdom's approval of a vaccine would not have any bearing on decisions for Trinidad and Tobago. Alicia Boucher of TV6 News has details from the Ministry of Health's virtual conference.
The UK is the first country in the Western Hemisphere to approve the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine for rollout, ordering 40 million doses to vaccinate 20 million people. But TNT is sticking to the COVAX facility, for which an investment was made up front to acquire vaccines on an equitable basis when they become available after approval from the World Health Organization. At this time, the WHO has not approved a vaccine.
The phase that we are most interested in is phase 3, which is the last phase of clinical trials. And we know now that we have 3 vaccines as a result. We have to agree as a country, for example, that we may take 2 or 3 vaccines because some are more suitable for some age groups compared to others. So it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with the vaccine.
PAHO WHO representative Dr. Erica Wheeler says discussions are underway in a bid to get the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine deemed 95% effective in preventing COVID-19 in the COVAX facility at a reduced price.
Right now, there are negotiations going on between PAHO and Pfizer-BioNTech because another piece of information is that this vaccine is much, much more expensive compared to the other two vaccines, some of which they've applied for emergency use at this point in time.
But that vaccine has to be stored at minus 70 degrees Celsius, and the capability to do so is a prerequisite for acquisition.
And when Trinidad and Tobago has the facility, that is a choice that the government would make based on also global advice about suitability for the vaccine. But certainly Trinidad and Tobago, once we are ready, will be able to receive it.
TNT would receive 280,000 vaccines from the COVAX facility in the first instance to vaccinate 20% of the population. And according to the Health Ministry, those most at risk would be given priority.
We are not going to get any vaccines that are not pre-qualified.
On December 10th, a meeting is scheduled between PAHO and member states to determine the way forward on the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. Meanwhile, TNT continues preparations for the eventual acquisition, with 3 storage sites planned at Cuba, Chaguaramas, and Tobago.
At this time, I would not be able to give you the information with respect to the timeline as to when those chillers would be ready, but I do know that they are working on it. I can also say that currently, Minister is doing a walkthrough at Chaguaramas Central Stores to look at the facility available there for the other sites in terms of storing the COVID vaccines.
Alicia Boucher, TV6 News.
You're listening to Caribbean Perspective with Eddie Frederick.
Over now to Guyana, where, while appearing on an interview on Benchcrop Radio on Monday night, opposition leader Joseph Harmon spoke to a number of issues currently in the public domain. He opined that the People's Progressive Party has become a party of business, among other things, since the death of its founding leader, Dr. Cheddi Jagan. Wendell Badri of HGP Nightly News reports.
The opposition leader addressed the issue of several plots of land currently under dispute, where he said that the PPP is of the belief that only they can own and possess land in Guyana and that they are entitled to the country.
And you will see that before 2015, that the bulk of Guyana, I would say as much as 80 or 85% of Guyana are already been allocated.
Addressing the matter of termination of a number of public service workers, Harmon stated that he is in receipt of information that a prominent politician from the current regime is interacting with prime ministers from CARICOM, informing them that the workers who have been removed from office are not suitably qualified for the positions they held. He contended this, stating that persons who are taking up the mantle for those positions are less qualified than those who previously held the post.
So what we are seeing here is a cleansing of all of these government services and replacing them by political hacks in some cases, and in some cases persons who are far less qualified than the persons who were removed.
In addressing the reason behind the alleged persecution of a number of election officials, Harmon stated that this surrounds the tarnishing of those persons' characters, seeking to discredit their ability to give evidence in the election petition matters currently before the High Court. Meanwhile, in addressing the election petitions, which are currently before the High Court, the leader of the opposition stated,
"But the idea behind all of this is that we will get the hearing of our petition, and that once we get to that point, it will prove that the PPP regime, that they are there by virtue of fraudulent practices, and that we want these elections, we open to the court, will vitiate these elections, and we'll go to new elections after that."
The opposition leader spoke about some of the things the APNU AFC government did to help develop the country while it was in power, which includes the decentralization of key government services to several regions and the necessary infrastructure to support these services, among other things. One of the regrets of the coalition government, he said, is that while it was in power, it was not able to fast-track economic benefits to communities and villages throughout the country. While stating that post-2015 the pride of being Guyanese was restored, Harmon said that the PPP has become a business party since the death of its founder, the late Dr. Chetty Jagan. He explained what he meant by this.
I believe until after Dr. Jagan died, the whole philosophy in that party changed. It became a party that was dealing with business, about business for a few people in the party. And so administration took a second level.
Wendell Badri, HGP Nightly News.
And now for Jamaica Roundup with Giovanni Dennis of TVJ News.
3 of the 9 members of the Uchens Wilson gang who were convicted in October have been sentenced to a total of 18 years in prison. Chief Justice Brian Sykes is handing down the sentences in the Home Circuit Court. Odine Smith was sentenced to 4 years. Lanworth G. Hagan, whose role was to drive members of the gang to locations to carry out robberies, was sentenced to 6 years. Darren Taylor, who also played the role of a driver, has been sent to prison for 8 years. The sentencing hearing continues. 13 Jamaicans who arrived in the island after they were deported from the United Kingdom amid strong campaigns and legal attempts to stop the controversial flight. The group landed at the Norman Manley International Airport between 7:30 and 8 o'clock. The Jamaicans, all males, are being housed at the Olympia Crown Hotel on Mullines Road in Kingston. Senior Policy Director of Crime Prevention and Community Safety in the Ministry of National Security, Renee Steele, told our news center that the men will be held at the facility for the next 2 days. She says health and security screenings are underway. That process should be completed early this afternoon. In the meantime, Health Minister Dr. Christopher Tufton says the deportees who arrived in Jamaica this morning will pose minimal risk to the public. He says they are being tested for COVID-19. The men will remain in quarantine for 14 days.
They'll be held for the period of time to get the results of the test, 48 hours approximately. And then depending on the results of the test, assuming that those tests are negative, they are going to be required to quarantine at home for the 14 days, which is not what we would normally require of our nationals coming into Jamaica. So testing, holding, and then after the results of the tests, then they'll be sent home for quarantine at home.
Dr. Tufton says the deportees will be strictly monitored during the 14-day quarantine.
If they have the virus on arrival, then it will show up in the tests that are done. Beyond that, though, if the virus is mutating and developing but not showing up, then they are going to be subjected to the 14-day quarantine. I mean, we will monitor, and I'm sure the Ministry of National Security will monitor the quarantine periods. And so unless somebody breaches that and was infected, the risk will be minimal.
And at least 10 Jamaicans were granted last-minute reprieve after the Home Office acknowledged they may be victims of modern slavery. They were taken off the flight hours before it was due to leave for Jamaica following legal intervention. According to Britain's independent newspaper, in one case, a 30-year-old man who went to the UK aged 11 had his deportation cancelled Tuesday after the Home Office was forced to acknowledge that he had indicators of being trafficked by county lines gangs in his 20s. Some of the Jamaicans were also taken off the flight because they have children in the UK. Jamaica's COVID-19 case count has increased to 10,864. 54 new cases were confirmed on Tuesday. Their ages range from 3 to 94 years. Meanwhile, the country's death toll remains at 258.
I am Eddie Frederick, wishing you a restful weekend. This has been Caribbean Perspective, a whole new approach to highlighting developments in the Caribbean. In the meantime, please continue to log on to CaribbeanPerspective.com for more daily news and more.